Pick up a Bowers & Wilkins speaker and knock on the cabinet. If it rings differently than it did 10 years ago, that is not your imagination. 4 ownership changes in 9 years left something behind in the crossover. Today, the repair shop tells you exactly what that is. No sponsored gear, no manufacturer relationships, just what the technicians know. 1966, Worthing, England. John Bowers built his first speaker in a garden shed behind his shop. He was not trying to build a brand. He was trying to solve an acoustic problem that the speakers available at the time could not solve. The result was a cabinet design that local musicians started requesting by name. Within a decade, Bowers & Wilkins had supplied reference monitors to Abbey Road Studios, the facility where the Beatles, Pink Floyd, and virtually every significant British recording of the era was mixed and mastered. That relationship with Abbey Road was not a sponsorship arrangement. Abbey Road's engineers chose Bowers & Wilkins because the speakers told the truth about what was on the tape. In a mastering environment, a speaker that flatters the recording is useless. You need a speaker that reveals every flaw, every imbalance, every frequency anomaly that needs correcting before the record goes to print. The 800 series, introduced in 1979 and refined continuously through the following decades, became the reference standard for recording studios worldwide. Sony, Universal, Warner, and hundreds of independent studios specified Bowers & Wilkins 800 series monitors as their primary reference tool. Not because of advertising, because of what technicians found inside them. What technicians found was an engineering culture that treated every component decision as a sound quality decision. The Kevlar woven cone mid-range driver was chosen specifically because Kevlar's stiffness-to-weight ratio produced a frequency response that was measurably more accurate than conventional cone materials. The tweeter on top design existed because John Bowers believed that separating the tweeter from the cabinet eliminated the resonance coloration that every other manufacturer was accepting as unavoidable. These were not marketing claims. They were engineering decisions that independent measurement confirmed and professional engineers validated with their careers. That is what Bowers & Wilkins was. What it became is a different story entirely. Mini Verdict, built by engineers who believed accurate sound was the only specification that mattered. Every decision after 2016 needs to be understood in that context. That engineering culture lasted 50 years under consistent ownership. The next 4 years brought 4 different owners. 2016, the first sale. EVA Automation. John Bowers died in 1987, and for the following 3 decades, the company remained under the control of people who had grown up inside the engineering culture he built. That changed in 2016 when Bowers & Wilkins was acquired by EVA Automation, a Silicon Valley technology company whose primary product was a home automation platform. The acquisition was positioned as a luxury smart home audio venture. The language in the press release was about ecosystems, connectivity, and the premium lifestyle market. The language was not about crossover topology or driver materials. For repair technicians, the first signal came in the product lineup adjustments that followed. The entry-level and mid-range models in the 600 and 700 series began showing component specifications familiar from contract manufacturing rather than from Bowers & Wilkins' own engineering documentation. Substitutions of components that measure similarly on a data sheet but behave differently under sustained listening conditions, the kind of changes a purchasing department makes when optimizing for margin rather than performance. The EVA Automation ownership lasted less than 2 years. In 2018, financial difficulties at the parent company forced a sale. Mini Verdict, the first ownership change, brought Silicon Valley thinking to a company built on acoustic engineering. The two have never been compatible. The second sale happened faster than most customers realized, and this time, the new owner brought familiar names with it. 2018, the second sale. Sound United. Sound United acquired Bowers & Wilkins in 2018. Sound United was the parent company of Denon, Marantz, Polk Audio, Definitive Technology, and Boston Acoustics, brands that regular viewers of this channel will recognize from previous episodes for reasons that were not flattering. The strategic logic was consolidation. Sound United was assembling a portfolio of audio brands under a single ownership structure, sharing supply chains, manufacturing relationships, and component sourcing across the portfolio. For a company optimizing for portfolio efficiency, this makes obvious financial sense. For a brand whose engineering identity depended on treating every component decision as a sound quality decision, it introduced a structural conflict. What technicians began finding in Bowers & Wilkins products during the Sound United period was not a dramatic degradation. It was the kind of gradual component substitution that does not show up in measurements that reviewers typically conduct, but does show up when you open the crossover network and look at what is soldered to the board. Specifically, electrolytic capacitors appearing in signal-critical positions in the crossover networks of several 600 and 700 series models, in positions where the engineering documentation from the pre-2016 period specified film capacitors. The difference is not theoretical. Electrolytic capacitors have a directional polarity requirement, a temperature sensitivity, and an aging characteristic that film capacitors do not have. They are also significantly cheaper. In a speaker retailing for £2,500 per pair, the component cost substitution generates a margin improvement that appears in a quarterly report as engineering efficiency. The Sound United period ended in 2020. Mini verdict, the engineering documentation said film capacitors. The purchasing department said electrolytic. That decision is in the crossover of several current production models, and it is not in any review you will find online. 2 ownership changes in 4 years. The third is the one that made repair technicians stop and look twice at what they were finding. Before the acquisition that changed everything, if this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe now. Quick question before we continue. Have you ever looked up who actually owns the speaker brand on your shelf? What Happens Next involved $1 billion, a medical technology company, and a crossover component decision that no press release will ever mention. 2020, the third sale. Masimo. In 2020, Sound United itself was acquired by Masimo Corporation. Masimo is a medical technology company based in Irvine, California. Their primary products are pulse oximeters, patient monitoring systems, and hospital-grade diagnostic equipment. Masimo had no prior involvement in consumer audio. Masimo had no audio engineering capability. Masimo paid over $1 billion for the Sound United portfolio. The acquisition was driven by Masimo's Chief Executive Officer Joe Kiani, who had a personal interest in the audio brands within the portfolio. The transaction was controversial enough that Masimo's own shareholders filed legal action against the company's board, arguing that the acquisition represented a misuse of corporate resources. The legal dispute was eventually settled, but the underlying question was never satisfactorily answered in public. For Bowers & Wilkins specifically, the Masimo period brought a management structure in which the people making decisions about speaker engineering had no background in acoustic engineering, no experience in the professional audio market, and no institutional connection to the engineering culture that John Bowers had built over 50 years. This lack of engineering culture showed up in manufacturing choices. What technicians report finding in products manufactured during the Masimo period is consistent with what the ownership structure would predict. The 600 series has seen cabinet wall thickness reductions in several models, measurable with a ruler, not requiring sophisticated equipment. The internal bracing that earlier generations used to control panel resonance has been simplified. The crossover component substitutions that began during the Sound United period continued and, in some models, extended to the tweeter crossover, which is the most acoustically critical section of the network. Technicians flagged the tweeter crossover as a key area of concern. The 800 series has been maintained at a higher standard. The engineering resources available under Massimo ownership were concentrated on the flagship product line, which generates the brand's credibility and justifies the overall portfolio valuation. The entry and mid-range lines, where the volume of sales occurs, reflect the cost structure of the ownership period. Mini-Verdict, a medical technology company with no audio engineering background, spent over $1 billion on a speaker brand. The crossover components absorbed the cost of that decision. The Massimo ownership lasted 2 years before the fourth and final sale to the largest consumer electronics company on Earth. 2022, the fourth sale. Samsung and Harman. In 2022, Massimo sold the Sound United portfolio to Samsung's Harman division. Harman's portfolio includes JBL, AKG, Crown, and dozens of other audio brands acquired through a strategy of portfolio consolidation that Samsung has been executing since its 2017 acquisition of Harman for $8 billion. Bowers & Wilkins is now one brand in a portfolio of dozens, owned by a division of the world's largest consumer electronics manufacturer. The prestige consumer audio brands in the portfolio are assets whose primary value to Samsung is the brand recognition they generate in the premium consumer market, supporting the halo effect for Samsung's broader consumer electronics business. The people making decisions about speaker components, cabinet construction, and crossover topology are now inside a corporate structure whose primary expertise is consumer electronics supply chain management and automotive audio integration. The people making those decisions are not the people John Bowers would have hired. The 800 series continues to supply Abbey Road. That relationship is now primarily a marketing asset for Samsung's Harman division rather than a validation of engineering decisions made by independent engineers pursuing acoustic accuracy as their primary objective. Mini-Verdict, 4 ownership changes in 9 years. Each one moved the decision-making further from the engineering bench and closer to the quarterly earnings report. So what do you do with this information? The answer is not to dismiss Bowers & Wilkins entirely. The 800 Diamond series, specifically the 802 D4 and above, continues to receive engineering resources that the rest of the lineup does not. The professional monitor relationship with Abbey Road creates an external accountability that constrains the component substitutions that have affected the 600 and 700 series. If your budget reaches the 800 series and you are buying new, you are buying a product that still carries meaningful continuity with the engineering culture that built the brand. The 600 series and 700 series at current pricing are a different proposition. You are paying a premium for a brand name whose engineering content at those price points no longer justifies the premium relative to what the same money buys elsewhere. 3 alternatives that technicians actually buy instead. Wharfedale. Wharfedale has built speakers in Yorkshire since 1932. No ownership change has introduced non-audio management into the engineering decision process. The Diamond series costs between $300 and $500 a pair. The crossover components are film capacitors. The cabinet bracing is not simplified to hit a quarterly target. The audio press stopped covering them because they do not pay for advertising. The people who actually listen to music never stopped buying them. Verdict: 90 years of honest engineering sold for less because nobody is paying to market it. ELA. Andrew Jones designed reference monitors at Pioneer and TAD before applying the same engineering discipline to a price point that most audiophile publications refuse to take seriously. The debut 2.0 series costs $350 a pair and measures better than speakers at 4 times the price. The ownership structure is a German engineering company that has been building audio equipment since 1926. No medical technology acquisitions, no automotive audio consolidation, just engineering. Verdict: reference-level engineering philosophy applied to a price point the high-end press pretends does not exist. KEF, specifically the LS50 Meta. KEF's Uni-Q driver places the tweeter at the acoustic center of the mid-bass cone, eliminating the timing difference between drivers that produces the faint blurriness in almost every conventional two-way speaker. The metamaterial absorption technology removes the rear wave distortion that conventional cabinet designs accept as unavoidable. At around $1,600, the engineering budget went into the driver, not into 4 rounds of acquisition financing. Prices mentioned are use-based estimates. Check your local market. Verdict: the engineering budget went into the part you actually hear, not the part you see in a magazine ad. Here is the principle I want you to take away from this video. One sentence. The name on the grille tells you what the brand used to stand for. The crossover components tell you what it stands for now. 3 words: independent, specified, serviceable. Every ownership change on this timeline failed at least one of those 3. Every brand on the trust list passes all 3, and none of them needed a billion-dollar acquisition to prove it. Subscribe if this changed how you think about your speakers. Which ownership change surprised you most? Drop it below. See you next time.